Hello friends, welcome back to a Mack Truck Book Stop. This is Mike here, and today we're talking about the Book of Imaginary Beings by Jorge Luis Borges for the country of Argentina, or Argentina in American English. So I would not necessarily recommend this as a first read to Borges. I'll just start out by saying that. I would recommend, though, the Big Collected Fictions, um, which is kind of the book that got me into Borges. And even though I am fluent in Spanish, I actually have not read Borges in Spanish yet, but I have to say I think he translates really well to English, so don't let that stop you. This book is not particularly important to read in Spanish either. The one I'm talking about today, which is the Book of Imaginary Beings. I'm sorry, I made the same exact mistake as this English edition did by not crediting also Margarita Guerrero, who was Borges's co-worker in putting together this compendium. He was losing, I believe when he put this together, he was losing his eyesight quite a bit and eventually did go blind, if you don't already know that about him. And she was instrumental, from what I can tell, in putting this together as well. So it really is a co-authorship, although as you can see, the English version does not credit her on the front cover, only in the interior here. So both of these Argentines put together this compendium of mythological creatures, folktale creatures. There's 116 or 112, something like that. None of the entries are very long. The way I read it was quite interesting because they're ordered alphabetically. So since they're ordered alphabetically, I thought it would be kind of dull to just read A through Z. So what I've done over the past 3 days is I used the index in the front here that shows, all of the imaginary creatures, and I started with the ones that seemed the least threatening, or the ones that I would be least scared to meet, and proceeded in order. Now, there were many that I did not even know what they were, and so ended up stumbling across some pretty frightening things early on just because they sounded innocent, but then it turned out they weren't. But I will say it was a fun way to read it, and more fun than, say, going alphabetically. I could imagine other games you could do. You could take 2 decks of tarot cards and assign, I guess, one of them to 1 through 56, and then the other through 57 through 112, and then kind of just draw, and if you wanted to do something like that, would be fun. That was one thing I had thought about. The other thing you could do is just kind of take them at random. You can also just use it as a reference book for mythical creatures. I mean, we've got stuff in here like Hauka, God of Thunder. You've got the Kraken, the Mandrake. You've got creatures by other authors like Odradek by Kafka. You've got a few creatures by C.S. Lewis. Unicorns, Chinese creatures, Japanese creatures. Disappointingly, not much from South America, which is, of course, where Borges is from. But that could be because at the time, there really wasn't a lot written or recorded about, say, Incan, or if we go a little more north, Aztec or Maya legends and creatures. You kind of had to go to the source to learn those legends. I don't think there was a whole lot published at the time that they were compiling this, so that could be why. I don't think the omission of South American creatures originary to the indigenous peoples of South America was necessarily intentional, or any kind of disrespect. I think there just wasn't a lot out there at the time. I could be wrong. But other than that, you do get a very broad sweep of the world. So, as far as being representative of Argentina and South America, this is not the book. But in following reading this book, Strange Beasts of China, that I just read previously, I wanted to delve into, the imaginary and mythological creatures that form part of our psyche, almost kind of like a Jungian perspective, and trying to think about like archetypes. And the way that I proceeded through this book, by instead of going A to Z and going in order of what sounded scariest to me, also led me to understand some things about what I fear most. And at the end of the video, I'll talk more about what that order kind of, I guess, revealed about myself, because I think that's probably less interesting than some of the other things I wanted to talk about. But one of the major things that came out of this book, and that I was most surprised and happy with, is that without knowing it, I realized that this book inspired a massive amount of one of my favorite series of books of all time, which is the Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. And then when I did a little digging, I found that Gene Wolfe admitted in an interview that he borrowed liberally from this Book of Imaginary Beings by Borges, and said, I felt that, he said, this is second-rate Borges, but even second-rate Borges is incredible. So it ended up inspiring a lot of the creatures and characters in the Book of the New Sun series, which someday I'd love to do a video series on. It's just a whole nother world of stuff I'm not even talking about in these videos, and I'm not even really going to get started on that. But if there are any Gene Wolfe fans out there, please comment and let me know that watch these videos, because I would love to share with any Gene Wolfe fan this book, because you will find so much inspiration for what I consider to be one of the greatest sci-fi works of all time, the Book of the New Sun. And some examples of that are the Baldanders, which is the name of one of the characters in it, the salamander, and it deepened this book deepened my appreciation for what I already considered to be one of the greatest works of all time in the science fiction genre, and it showed how it's actually connected to like mythological stuff in the past. Although it did reduce some of the mystery, and I realized, oh well, Gene Wolfe didn't pull this stuff out of a hat. He got it from somewhere. And the reality is, most authors do that. Authors steal stuff that they love from other sources, but it's still an incredibly original work. So now that I've gotten that out of my system, this is a really joyful read. It's truly, if you have fun with it, if you treat it as just kind of a fun romp through mythological creatures, it's so digestible, because I think the longest chapter or entry on the beast is like 3 pages maybe. They're not long, so you can really just use it as a reference or bite-sized pieces. But I do recommend finding a fun way that you can read it besides just going A to Z, as I mentioned already. And it does have Borges's wit, like a touch of it. It really stays toward the sources. It's like Borges has some works where it's almost like he's doing a homework assignment or like a research paper. But then he'll say something or present something in a way that is just totally him, and that's kind of his style. And just, I'm gonna permit myself to just talk up why I love Borges so much in general. I think his fascination for like mythological creatures also, you can find a little bit in other works, and without saying it, he just kind of shows and presents how mysterious and how deep some of these things are in the human psyche, and how they reflect aspects of ourselves that we may not fully understand, and that in the future will only be revealed to us. For example, outside of this book, this is how he talks about some of the creatures, but outside of this book, I think the Library of Babel is has preceded or foreseen what this whole AI, Chat GPT, that kind of stuff, this AI revolution of of artificial intelligence being able to produce like every possible work of literature that could ever exist. The Library of Babel actually exists today in the form of AI. AI can produce any possible thing you can imagine. You just have to give it the right prompt. Um, and that's in the sense of it, not only literature but images and everything. Of course, the Library of Babel is also kind of a metaphor for the universe and life itself. I mean, that's obvious, but I also think a lot of Borges's work foresees future technology and the power kind of that is in our hands to use artificial intelligence. And I just wanted to throw that out there and see if someone wants to say something about that, because I plan to do a video like in the far future about that theme and approach Borges from like a perspective of what he's saying about artificial intelligence, and which is why I think he's so relevant today. Um, he is, in my opinion, the originator and the like greatest of the postmodern authors. I know that's people will disagree with me on there, at least that I've read up to this point. If there's one author I had to pick to read their entire bibliography, it would be Borges at this time. Which, of course, I mean, I'm not ready to start doing that yet, but it is something I've been playing around with as doing alongside this video project. He is just kind of that author that you feel a special connection with certain authors, and his kind of mix of but I think he is just so it's like when I read him, I get the sense that I'm reading somebody who's just so much smarter than me, not just in what he knows, but the fact that it's like he'll take an idea and then take it to the next level, and then to the next level, and then to the next level, and at the point that most people would stop, he goes another step further, and then another step further. So again, sorry, this is just kind of a Borges love fest video. He doesn't really do that in the Book of Imaginary Beings. This is probably his most fun book, and if you thought of it like as an album, this would be like a Borges B-sides album kind of, but it's still great and it's still fun, and I still think you can get something out of the Book of Imaginary Beings, or in Spanish, I believe it's called El Libro de los Seres Imaginarios or something to that effect. Yeah, and it's really just a fun read. So, and I feel like this is one of those things that you learn more from this book than you even comprehend, um, because Borges tells you where, like, in what writings of the past do these creatures first appear. For example, he mentions Pliny or Pliny. I don't know how you pronounce that. Pliny. An old writer, ancient writer, was responsible for a lot of these. And you also have like references to other literature, as I mentioned, Kafka, C.S. Lewis. He tells you where all these things first appear, or in what culture they first appear, and gets, in very few words, just like cuts to the root of what is a dragon. And there's a certain profundity and simplicity to it, and an economic use of words that Borges is so known for. And of course, Margarita Guerrero, we can't forget her, and we don't know what hand she had in it. Her particular voice is not, to me, present so much in this book. I mean, it really, a lot of it feels like the voice of Borges. Um, so besides that, I guess I'll just talk about, like, personally, kind of the way I approached it, what it taught me as far as introspection. I'll try to be brief about it, because uh, I think I do recommend this way if you're thinking about reading the book, of starting with the ones that are like most familiar or least fearful to you, and then moving up, and then because it just kind of like expands and gets bigger and bigger and opens you up. Um, So, uh, sorry, I was thirsty. So, the like the first ones I would start with would be elves, gnomes, fairies, right? Kind of basic things. You could also think of it like for the gamers out there. I've been a gamer at times in my life, video games. Um, Imagine them as like one of those like Dark Souls or Demon Souls or Elden Ring bosses, where like you start with the start with the creatures that like you'd least want to fight as the boss, and then like you level up and gain experience, and then by the end of it you're fighting the Hydra and the demons of Judaism or something. I don't know. You can that's a fun way to look at it too. So yeah, I started with like the elves, fairies, gnomes, things like that, and started working my way up to um, other things like strange animals, like the celestial this or that. A king of fire and his steed was a later one. Um, the golem, uh, the Chinese fox, and you work your way up, and then I started getting into more of the ones that I wasn't sure what they were, and everyone was kind of a die roll, like, ooh, is this going to be a scary one? Because if you really imagine yourself meeting these things, or you could look at this way of reading it like going through a museum. The museum is designed to show you first the things that are like, okay, that's interesting, and then eventually you get to like the wow stuff, like stuff that represents the world, or like monstrous demons in hell or something like that. And by the end of this museum, you're just kind of like mind blown, because you've seen all these creatures that have never existed. If you have a really good imagination, I guess. Um, so again, that's another way I was kind of looking at this as I went through it. But I found it interesting, kind of the ones that I saved for last, and the very last one was the double. And I actually think that's kind of that's very revealing, not only about myself, but um, it's the most terrifying of all, because the double is an aspect of yourself that you can't control or completely understand. It's kind of the idea of the shadow self, and I think all of the creatures that terrify us represent some aspect of ourself. Again, that's a very Jungian way to approach it, I suppose. But at the same time, you can remember as you're reading this that in the past some of these are like medieval creatures or ancient creatures excuse me, that people really believed in, and especially like commoners, or but really everybody, because there was just so much unknown out there. And there's one that's like represented, that it's like a mythological creature that represents the world ocean. And to the Greeks, it might have been Ouroboros, I can't remember, but like the world ocean, that they imagined the world just being surrounded by this great ocean. And when you actually think about it, that was their concept of the world, because they didn't know about the Americas. They might have known about like Australia, probably not. They probably didn't know about Australia. So for all they knew, it was just this great ocean surrounding the world. In a way, that's kind of true. There's another one that's about like how the planets are beings, that I thought was really interesting. A lot of these I wrote notes saying like, oh, new sun connection, animals that live in the mirror. Oh, that one was just that the way Gene Wolfe took that and used it in New Sun, beautiful. And I found that to be one of the most terrifying ones as well, because I've always had a little bit of like fear of mirrors in the dark, or like this idea that whatever's in the mirror could it's a totally irrational fear, I know, but it's like the I find the idea of like a world being birthed, or something coming out of the mirror that isn't in our reality, like to be a really creepy idea. I don't know. Even though it's just so out there and improbable, and I don't logically believe it. Um, I think it has something to do with that like aspect of yourself, that the psychology of yourself, and that you don't know or can't understand or can't control. Um, there are some that like represent infinity, like the Bahamut, can help you conceptualize infinity. The Chimera, which helps you conceptualize impossible. The word chimeric actually means like impossible in some sense, in one sense of the word. Um, the fauna of China in the United States are two sections where it just kind of goes through some folk tales. Mentions my home state of Wisconsin, which is great. Um, and yeah, that's about it. I mean, that covers it. As I stated, I'm not. I'm going to go back to not announcing the next book I read because I want it to just kind of be what I feel, what I finish. I have some ideas, but I think this about covers what I wanted to say about Jorge Luis Borges, the Book of Imaginary Beings. Um, I appreciate once again everybody who comments, subscribes, likes, whatever you do, however you participate in this channel, even if it's watching one video that interests you. I would love to hear your thoughts, and we'll do hope you continue to join me on this journey through reading the countries. It's been just a wild, fantastic ride so far, and definitely, if anyone is disappointed in my choice for Argentina, know that I am considering a bonus episode at some point. So Argentina is definitely one that I would do a bonus episode on at some point. Yeah, so thank you and have a great night.